It was a bright and sunny, humid Hawaii day. The birds were chirping, the grasshoppers hopping, and an 8-year-old Robert and his friend were pouting. Well, why were they pouting when they lived in paradise that we call Hilo, Hawaii? Well, it turns out the local schoolboys refused to invite them to their beach house for a weekend of fun. You see, it wasn't because Robert was unfriendly, ugly, or unpopular. He was just poor. An ailment you are all too familiar with. He wanted to make money, and Robert was about to learn the most valuable lesson of his life. Robert's poor dad was an educated man. He had a great job and an even greater salary. But he was broke. He subscribed to the old way of making money. Go to school, get a job, get into debt, and die. He had no retirement plan. He did not have the knowledge to tell these boys how to make money successfully. But thankfully for Robert, Mike had an ace up his sleeve. His dad, otherwise known as Rich Dad. Rich Dad had built an empire to where he was one of the richest men in Hawaii, all while having no more than an 8th grade education. Mike told his father about his needs to make money, and shortly after, a meeting was set up between the two boys and Rich Dad. The boys, excited to make their first dollar, were eager to start, but their dreams were about to be shattered. Inside Rich Dad's office, Rich Dad made them a deal. He would teach them everything he knew, and just like that, the boys agreed. The very first assignment, dusting shelves in his convenience store. Yes, you heard that right. Doing menial tasks for 3 hours every Saturday for what some would call slave labor wages. 10 cents an hour. Yes, you heard that right. 10 cents an hour. This went on for weeks. The boys became pretty distraught. They questioned how this was going to make them rich. Robert was ready to quit, but Rich Dad had already been 5 steps ahead of him. He told Mike that this would happen, and when it did, let's set up a meeting. Robert was confused. He was wondering if this was some kind of sick prank that was being played on him. Just when he thought it couldn't get worse, he was proven wrong once again. The day of the meeting arrives. Robert was hot, sweaty, and emotions running high. He had been waiting in Rich Dad's dark, dusty living room for over an hour. Upon Rich Dad's arrival, Robert was furious, with sweat running down his pores and his forehead vein visible. Robert accused Rich Dad of being greedy, lacking respect, and not honoring their agreement. Rich Dad laughed and sat him down and explained the lesson that changed his life forever, making him the millionaire you all know and love today. Life doesn't teach you with words, but by pushing you around. Some people let life push them around. Others get angry and push back against their boss and loved ones. But some people learn a lesson from it, and in fact, welcome pushing them around because it means that they need to learn something. Those who don't learn that lesson spend their lives blaming everybody else and waiting for a big break, or decide to play it safe and never risk or win big. Robert was silent, but beginning to understand. He sat listening to Rich Dad as if he was telling him the secret to life. Plot twist, he was. Rich Dad goes on to say, "You and Mike are the first ones to ever ask how to make money." And he had over 150 employees. Rich Dad proceeds to ask Robert what lesson he learned. Robert replied that you're cheap and exploit your workers. Rich Dad laughed and steered Robert in the right direction. Rich Dad said that many people blamed others when it was their own attitude that was the problem. Robert sat there wide-eyed, open-jawed, as Rich Dad poured the secrets of the universe to him. Rich Dad was glad Robert got angry. He would be worried if he wasn't. Rich Dad continued telling him that money will not solve people's issues, as many people have high-paying jobs yet still live paycheck to paycheck, simply because they lack financial intelligence, just like poor dad. Rich Dad resumed by saying, the emotions you felt about working for 10 cents an hour, disappointed and not feeling like it was enough, is what he'd feel for his entire life if he hadn't learned this lesson now. Rich Dad also introduced the topic of taxes. showing him that the poor and middle class allow the government to tax them, while the rich do not. Rich Dad was now about to ask Robert the most important question of his life. He asked him if he still had the passion to learn. Robert quickly replied with an excited, "Yes." "Good. Now I will pay you nothing while you work at my store." Robert was speechless and asked why. Rich Dad told him to use his head and figure it out. After 3 long weeks of watching their friends go to soccer games, read comic books, and genuinely have a great time, the boys were stuck working in Rich Dad's shop for completely free. Well, until one day, Rich Dad enters the shop one beautiful morning. He pulls the 2 boys aside and asks them if they learned anything yet, which they responded that they hadn't. "Great," said Rich Dad, and proceeds to offer the boys 25 cents an hour. Robert did not think his work was worth 25 cents an hour, so he resisted. Next, Rich Dad offered $1 an hour, and like before, the boys resisted. Rich Dad then offered $2 an hour. Robert, sweating and anxiety running high, remained silent. A final offer was given for an entire $5. This would have made Robert the richest kid ever. And just for reference, $5 was worth $57 in today's money. Despite this, Robert continued to resist. He could not be bought out. Rich Dad, with a smirk on his face, knew that he had just passed the test. Rich Dad explained that it was great they did not have a price. Most people did, because their lives are controlled by fear and greed. Fear of without being makes them work hard to earn a paycheck. But once they have that money, greed gets them thinking about all the things they could buy, which makes them need more money, which makes them spend more. It is what I call the rat race. He continued, the first step was admitting to themselves that what they were feeling. Many people give in to their emotions of thinking logically. They are afraid of money running their lives. The 2 boys sat there with a certain look in their eye. A look like they had just been given the knowledge of the universe. But Rich Dad was not done yet. He further explains that it is not just the poor who face this fear, but the rich as well. This is something he wanted to teach the boys. As the old saying goes, more money, more problems. Rich Dad needed to explain something else. School was important. Yeah, he had an 8th grade education, but that did not mean his learning ended there. He explained that when you graduate school, that is not the end of your learning as most people believe it is. It is the beginning. Before Rich Dad's departure, he left them with advice that would change their lives forever. The moment you see one opportunity, you will see them for the rest of your life. Grateful for this newfound knowledge gifted to them, they decided to finally act upon it. And boy, it was a success. The boys noticed that the comic book delivery man would come into the store every so often to restock the comics. They had an idea. They wanted to repurpose the old comics to something useful. They asked the man if they could have the old comics. Sure thing, he said, under one condition: do not resell them. The boys then created a library of comics where local kids could come by and enjoy them. For a price, of course. They hired Mike's sister to watch over the operation. Everybody was getting paid. Everyone was happy. They continued to make a great profit until it was ruined by the local bully who wanted to pick fights with everyone. He was probably jealous. The library was soon shut down, but the business venture had just started. It is not how much you make, it's how much money you keep. When was the last time you had to pay for an unexpected expense? Do you even have an emergency fund? A recent poll from Bankrate states otherwise. Only 44% of US adults would pay an emergency expense of $1,000 or more, while 59% of Americans are uncomfortable with their level of emergency savings. As of a May 2024 polling, 32% of people are very uncomfortable and 27% of people are somewhat uncomfortable, with 27% of US adults having no emergency savings whatsoever, the highest percentage since 2020. I know, these stats can be partially blamed on the pandemic, but they were not that much better before that, which is why Rich Dad taught financial literacy. Let's do a bit of a time jump here. 3.5 decades later, Mike now runs Rich Dad's company. He's doing an even better job than Rich Dad, and Robert has retired at the ripe old age of 47. Following Rich Dad's lessons had got him here. End of story, let's pack it up. Just kidding. Let's show you how he did it. It was 1923, Chicago. The city was bustling, industry was booming, and wealth was plenty. The world's greatest leaders were meeting at the Edgewater Beach Hotel. Among them were none other than Charles Schwab, Samuel Easel, Howard Hobson, and many more. They were rich, powerful, and the poster boys of success. Funny thing is, 25 years later, their lives were tragically ended, dead broke, exiled, or in prison. Why, you ask? The stock market crash in 1929 and a lack of financial literacy. Yeah, that's right. The world's richest men were not immune to the lack of financial literacy. It is not about how much you make, but how much you keep. If you need any more examples, look at the countless number of celebrities, athletes, lotto winners. Most all end up broke and worse than before. People stop Robert every day just to ask, how'd you get so rich? He simply replies, if you want to be rich, you need to be financially literate. He compares the way people act to how building a skyscraper with a slab made for a small home is like graduating a school with little or no financial literacy. Rich Dad made quite the effort to instill this in Robert's youth. Here's what he taught him. Rule number 1, you must know the difference between an asset and a liability. Only buy assets. That is quite literally all you need to know. Simple, right? I know. Well, the stats earlier tell a very different story. When Rich Dad explained it to the teenage boys, they thought he was joking. How could adults not understand this? Shouldn't everybody be rich? They said the issue lies with the most people being educated differently. Take poor Dad for example. He was one of the most educated men on the island, but still died poor, with the only inheritance being debt. The goal is to unlearn what you already know. I know, this may be hard, but still necessary. The true definition of an asset and liability do not lie in words, but numbers. Check out this drawing. The top part is your income statement. Measures income and expenses, and the bottom is your balance sheet, used to balance against liabilities. Assets add to your income. In other words, they add money to your pocket. The cash flow pattern of a liability takes money from your pocket. Easy in, easy out. Want the formula to become rich? Buy assets. These numbers are not just numbers, but they tell a compelling tale. Take a look at these diagrams. It will tell you all you need to know about their financial story. Here is a cash flow of a poor person. Here's a cash flow of a middle class person. And here's the cash flow of a wealthy person. Those in debt believe the answer is to make more money, but without changing their cash flow pattern, they will always remain in that pattern, just like all the celebrities, athletes, and lotto winners. Robert then tells us a devastating story of a young couple he knew. Young, happy couple, madly in love. Both had high-paying jobs only to be hit with the number one expense for most people. That's right, taxes. They simply cannot escape them. They buy a fancy car, taxes. They buy land, taxes. They build a house, taxes. I think you get the idea. Suddenly, their liabilities are adding up with a mortgage and credit card debt. This traps them in the rat race, a tale as old as time. This couple, stressed to their teeth about money, even decide to have a baby. They soon get higher incomes, but guess what? More taxes. This couple is refusing to change their habits. Their debt continues, and they get trapped, just like many Americans following the same dogma. Rich Dad made sure to teach Robert to challenge that dogma. He even got into fights with his poor dad about money and home ownership as an asset. Poor Dad believed his home was his greatest asset, while Rich Dad knew it was a liability. Many people do not understand that your house, while nice to have, takes out money from your pocket with taxes and other expenses. As seen in 2008, the value of your home always does not go up. How can you take advantage of prime opportunities if all of your money is tied up in a house? Seems like one big liability. But that doesn't mean it cannot be an asset. You must buy a house to generate cash flow. Once you have enough income generating assets to cover a house, then you buy a house. The middle class gets stuck in the rat race because they treat their home as an asset instead of buying these income generating assets with their salary as their main income. They invest in their safe little mutual fund, paying thousands for a subpar money manager, all because they feel safe because their balance sheet is not balanced. Who knew? Robert always defines wealth as this. Wealth is a person's ability to survive so many number of days forward on. If you stopped working today, how long could you survive? The rich focus on their asset column while everyone else focuses on their income statement. In 1974, Ray Kroc was asked to speak to an eager class of college students at the University of Texas. Robert's friend attended. This meeting went well with all the like-minded students. Ray, surprised at how much they wanted to learn, then invites them out to lunch. After downing a few burgers and some broskies, Ray then asked the students one vital question. What business am I in? At first, the students laughed and replied with the business of hamburgers. Ray busted out in laughter. He was not in the hamburger business, but the real estate business. The look on the students' faces were absolutely priceless. Ray knew the land below the restaurant was more valuable, making McDonald's one of the most profitable businesses today. Robert's friend took this lesson to heart. Today he owns car washes, and a lot too. But his real business is the real estate below. Many people work for everybody else like their boss, the government, and the bank. Ray and Rich Dad knew too well what Secret 3 was. Mind your own business. Robert often asks, what is your business? They often reply with, oh, I'm a banker. And asks if he owns the bank. No, I work here. This man has his profession confused with his business. It's okay to have a profession, but please, mind your business. Minding your own business doesn't mean starting a company. Instead, your business revolves around your asset column, not your income column. Here are a few examples of real-world assets that can help you mind your own business. 1. Businesses that do not require your presence. You can own them, and they must be ran by other people. Otherwise, it's a job. Stocks, bonds, income-generating real estate, notes, royalties from intellectual properties such as music, scripts, YouTube, etc. Anything else that has value, produces income, or appreciates and has a ready market. Oh, and one final rule. Acquire assets that you love. After acquiring these assets, your cash flow will grow. Feel free to indulge in the finer things in life. You earned it. My rich dad just played the game smart, and he did it through corporations, the biggest secret of the rich. I remember being taught in school the story of Robin Hood and his merry men. He takes from the rich and gives from the poor. This seems pretty fair, right? Wrong. He's a crook. And Rich Dad agreed. Many people in the United States want the rich to pay more taxes. It was the same when Robert was a young adult too. But it is always a ruse by politicians to raise taxes on the poor and middle class. And do you know who pays the most? You, the highly educated middle class American. Didn't see that one coming, huh? To understand how this happened, let's take a brief look at history. Little do people know that before all these taxes we pay today, there were virtually none in the creation of this great nation. Heck, we even protested against a tiny tea tax. Other than the occasional levy for war, now we pay tax on our income, sales tax on our purchases, capital gain tax, property tax, inheritance tax, and many more. Sometimes you even pay tax on the same money 3 times or more. But how did all of these taxes come to be? Politicians all sold them as a greater cause. We need you to pay this temporary income tax to fund the Great War. Well, guess what? We still pay that tax today. And so much for temporary. we need to tax the rich, turns into the rich finding a way out and the burden moving on to you. Happens every time. Taxes are for the rich to avoid and the poor to pay. You want to pay taxes like the rich? Start a corporation. And disclaimer, this is not an in-depth search into legal entities, but just enough to get your feet wet to create the legal entity that suits your needs. What typically comes to mind when you hear a corporation? Apple, Uber, Applebee's, big buildings, factories. Technically, they are corps, but a corporation is not a building, not a warehouse, or anything like that. All it is a legally binding document sitting in some attorney's files. Yep, that's it. That's all you need to pay lower taxes. If those who get up and go to work every morning and pay taxes could only understand this, they too would become rich. The tax man is a bully who will always take more if you let him. This is why Rich Dad and Robert both paid for top tax consultants, attorneys, and accountants. It's expensive to not know the law, but much cheaper to pay for top guys. In Robert's mid-20s, fresh out of the Marine Corps, working for Xerox, he was disappointed to see just how much the taxman was taking from his paycheck. That motivated him to form his first corporation in 1974 and work even harder at his day job to amass income-generating assets. And just after 3 short years, his corporations were able to afford him a new Porsche. The lesson learned from Rich Dad taught him how to break out of the rat race at an early age. This is all because he trained his financial IQ. Financial IQ, or financial intelligence, is what makes all this possible. There is no rich if you always spend more than you earn. Financial IQ is made from just 4 concepts. Accounting, which is financial literacy or the ability to read numbers and evaluate strengths and weaknesses of any business. Investing, the science and strategies of making money. Understanding markets, the science of supply and demand and market conditions. And the law, tax advantages and protections. With the law being the most important, as it can make you rich or it can land you in jail. This is the power of corporations.